Hey everyone, this is Mike with BuzzTox, and today we're going to be doing our deep dive into episode 1 of The Mandalorian. We're going to go through the show and point out some Easter eggs, reflect on the show, and get into what's going on with these characters and the storyline. I'm a huge fan of Star Wars. I used to read all the Legends books as a kid, but I haven't really been happy with a lot of what's going on with the franchise, along with the movies. Pretty much all of them, since the original, have had issues in my opinion. So I'm happy to say that the first episode of The Mandalorian didn't disappoint. I'm thrilled with how they've integrated this story into the Star Wars universe, and I'm more excited to see episode 2 of this show than I am in seeing the new Star Wars movie. So our show starts off with our intro of The Mandalorian, following a beacon on a snowy planet. We cut to a bar scene where two individuals, a Quarren and a humanoid, are about to cut up a blue mithril. The Mandalorian enters and we get our first taste of how awesome he can be. He ends up taking the two guys out, and we cutting the one guy in half with the door, and we learn that the mithril was his bounty and that the Mandalorian is a bounty hunter like Boba Fett from the original series. I love the intro music in this scene with the Japanese flutes / Western theme, showing us the influence that the show is going to get from Akira Kurosawa and the Sergio Leone films of the past. We then fast cut to the title, and this was a great sequence which had me thinking a lot about the show Preacher and the way it was done. Fast, in and out, back to the show. We cut to Cabusian ferryman who calls in a speeder for the Mandalorian and his captive. He declines the first one, which has an R2 unit as a driver, and we learn that he doesn't like / trust droids at all. We now get the introduction to our second stand-up comedian making an appearance, Brian Pawson. The first was the mithril played by Horatio Sanz, and I love the acting by these guys. It's very real, it's humanizing, and Horatio is funny and quick. We're channeling a lot from sci-fi shows like The Orville and Firefly in this show, rather than traditional Star Wars or Star Trek type sci-fis. It's very humanizing in general. We learn people actually go to the washroom in Star Wars, something which hasn't really been touched on in many of these shows. The speeder takes them to his ship, a Razor Crest design, and we get the binocular visuals in that scene that we've seen in several of the original Star Wars series. The mithril criticizes the ship, and this is much like Luke did to the Millennium Falcon in A New Hope. It's old, it's pre-Empire. And we later see him complimenting it, trying to get on the good side of the Mandalorian. They escape after being attacked by a Ravanax, this giant walrus-like creature, and the visuals are great in this scene, especially the one where the speeder is getting destroyed, and I see the influence of Firefly, the kind of like blurry, distant visuals that we get in this episode. The Mandalorian has an Amban phase pulsar, which he uses on the creature. This is the forked rifle that he's got with the antlers on the back. This was first seen being wielded by Boba Fett, actually, in the Star Wars Holiday Special. This was the first appearance of Boba Fett. In the ship, we see the Mandalorian has captured several individuals, trapping them in carbonite, and we can assume that this method of transportation of bounties has become popular since Darth Vader and Boba Fett used it on Han Solo in Empire Strikes Back. He lands on a village on a gray landscape, and we see a marketplace scene with an R5 astromech droid. We then cut to another bar scene, this one much like the Mos Eisley Cantina, with a bunch of different species and characters conversing and hanging out. We see a hooded creature in what reminded me of a General Grievous type mask. We see this awesome squid-faced creature, maybe another Quarren, with a robotic helmet on his head. There's this blonde-haired woman in red armor, an orange Rhodian, two Transdoshans. These are the same species as Bossk in Empire. And from the trailers, we'll see that the Mandalorian is going to have to deal with these guys later on. And I really like that there's no CGI in any of these creature scenes. Hopefully they'll keep it to a minimum throughout the series. They know from the past and the failure of some of those George Lucas, the 4th, 5th, and 6th movies, that CGI, too much of it can be a bad thing. We're introduced to this scene with Greef Karga. He's the head of the Bounty Hunters Guild, in which the Mandalorian is a member. Karga is impressed by how quickly the Mandalorian has caught all his bounties. And interestingly, in this scene, he speaks Huttese, and this is Jabba the Hutt's language. We learn where we are in the Star Wars timeline in this scene. The Empire is gone, and it's recent. So we are after the events of Return of the Jedi. Now, the Mandalorian wants more work, but all Karga has are low bounties. Bail jumpers, a wanted smuggler. Could this have been a reference to Han Solo? Maybe not, because he's probably pretty popular at this time, but it's a nod to Han. He offers him a job that's off the books for the guild, underworld stuff, which doesn't have a bounty disc associated with it, and it potentially pays a lot, so the Mandalorian accepts the chit, which leads him to the client. And we learn a bit about the guild and how the bounty hunter system works in this scene. They're given chain codes for their bounties. This is kind of like a social security number with more information, and this is probably a system brought in by the Empire for its citizens. We learn that things are in chaos at this time with the guild, and therefore likely everywhere else in the universe with the fall of the Empire. We learn that bounty hunters are now taking jobs which pay less than the guild minimum prices in order to get by. And Cargo tries to offer the Mandalorian Imperial credits in this scene, but they're becoming useless. So he has to accept calamari and flan, which for half of his payment. We then cut to another village shot after this. We see Jawas in this, and I thought that they were indigenous to Tatooine. So are we on Tatooine? Or maybe the Jawas are also a spacefaring species. I'm sure Star Wars big fans are going to go nuts about this little point. The chit leads him to an address which is guarded by a TT-8L gatekeeper droid. This is the same type shown in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. We meet the client, and he's guarded by 4 disheveled, dirty-looking stormtroopers. He seems to be an old Imperial loyalist, likely a hero of the Empire, with his Imperial-symboled medallion on his chest. The client is played by Werner Herzog. He's imposing, he's polite, but it's Werner Herzog. The man is wonderful at playing this terrifying villain. He offers the Mandalorian Beskar as payment for the bounty. Now, this is a very valuable, rare, lightsaber-proof steel used to make Mandalorian armor, and it's from Mandalore, the home planet of the Mandalorian. It's not a species per se, it's more of a way of life, a culture for them. Now, the client refers to restoring the natural order of things with the Beskar going to a Mandalorian. But he's also referring in this to the restoration of the Empire, and he asks the Mandalorian if he agrees. Now, the client and especially Dr. Pershing want the bounty brought in alive, but the client is pragmatic. He knows the world is messy, bounty hunting is complicated, as he says, so he'll accept the bounty dead, but for a lower fee. Now, the Mandalorian then takes his bar of Beskar and goes to a Mandalorian enclave in the city. Along the way, we see them roasting salacious bee crumbs. This is from Return of the Jedi, and they're the annoying Kowakian creatures from that movie that we saw in Jabba's palace. In the Enclave, we see Mandalorians and children playing. The Mandalorian gets a smith to make him a pauldron for his armor out of the Beskar, and we learn in this scene that he was once a foundling, an orphan brought into the Mandalorian tribe. Quick flashes of backstory tell us his family and community were slaughtered in an attack when he was a child. And they seem to have been this peaceful people without any weapons or armor. And I hope we get more of the backstory and see who brought him into the tribe and raised him as a Mandalorian. And we learn some of the values of the Mandalorian culture. He hasn't received his signet yet with the tribe, which is a traditional thing. And this might be given to him when he makes certain accomplishments. And this shows us that his character is not yet fully developed. He isn't some unstoppable, flawless killing machine. He makes mistakes. This is shown in the next scene where he's saved by the Ugnaught voiced by Nick Nolte. And he still has to undergo personal growth and development, which is shown in the scene where he has to tame the blurg. This classic Western scene of taming an animal shows us the gentleness that the Mandalorian is capable of, and it humanizes him, creating more depth than we ever got with characters like Boba Fett. Now, Nick Nolte's character is also great. He has this Yoda-like quality to him. What he says goes. The scene in his small home was a reference to Luke in Yoda's hut in Empire Strikes Back, and we learn that he's helped others get to the bounty before, but they've all died. He wants to help the Mandalorian get rid of the encampment on this world, because they brought destruction to the area and lots of death. And he believes that he believes in the Mandalorian because he's heard legends of Mandalorian strength. Now, he gives our Mandalorian strength by reminding him of his heritage, the riding of the mythosaur that his ancestors did on Mandalore. Now, this mythosaur is that the white skull-headed creature we see on the symbol of different Mandalorians. I think it's on Boba Fett's chest, actually. We next have The Raid on the Encampment by IG-11, a bounty hunter voiced by Taika Waititi. This is definitely an homage to the Sergio Leone's Western A Fistful of Dollars in terms of the set design. And we also see this Gatling gun in this scene, which was used by the villain in that movie. So they defeat all of the Nikto guards, and we get our big reveal in this scene. The 50-year-old bounty is actually this baby Yoda. It's not Yoda himself. Yoda's gone, but it's of the Yoda species. Now, there's no name for these guys, which is why I'm having a little trouble explaining it. And there's almost nothing we know about this species because George Lucas had this strict policy of leaving Yoda as a relative mystery. We know that the species had several Jedi Masters in the past, and we can assume that they have this predisposition of being sensitive to the Force. So is this little guy or girl a Force user? Is the Mandalorian going to protect it rather than giving it over to the client? Who hired IG-88 to kill this bounty? Because it wasn't our client, they wanted him brought alive. Remember, RG-11, says that he wants to kill it. He's been hired to kill it, so who did that? There's a lot of characters which we've seen in trailers which haven't shown up yet, so I'm interested to see what's going to happen next with these characters, and I'm definitely hooked on this show. So, keep watching with us. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we can go through this story together. Thanks.